Welcome to A Life in Film. Our guest today is a writer-director for movies such as the critically acclaimed Smash, starring Aaron Paul and Mary Elizabeth Winstead, The Circle, starring Tom Hanks and Emma Watson, and the brilliant Spectacular Now, starring Miles Teller and Shailene Woodley, to name just a few. His latest movie, Summering, a coming-of-age movie starring Lake Bell, is out now. And on the horizon is Reese Witherspoon produced series Daisy Jones and the Six, and the highly anticipated Apple series Shrinking, with Harrison Ford taking on his first major TV role. Our guest today is writer-director James Ponsoldt. James, how's it going? How have you been?
Oh, I'm good. How are you doing?
Very well, very well. I got the chance to obviously see your new film, Summering, and I loved it. And I'm sure you've heard this comparison a few times before, but it reminds me of one of my favorite films, Stand By Me. And it's that real kind of, coming of age, that summer that seems to last forever. How was this influenced by your own childhood? How did it come about writing this?
Yeah, I think the thing that probably informed most of it was just becoming a parent. I have three children. So much I think of what I think about now is sort of representation of young people on screen, how they're represented, just because I'm having those conversations all the time with my kids. And my wife works at a school which is like 6th through 12th grade. So like 11 and 12-year-olds come in and they leave at age 18. And so she's constantly engaged with kids and their parents. And a lot of my friends now have kids. So it's just a world of conversations between adults and children trying to understand each other and not always understanding each other. I think I've been interested in these issues from when I first started making films. A friend pointed out to me recently that my thesis film in film school was about a single mother and her daughter, mother played by Jeannie Garofalo. And so I've kind of always been, curious and about that. And I think also just inevitably growing up very closely with my mom and sister, a lot of like what I really like in terms of movies and books and music came from the two of them. But specifically with Summering, it began with a man being found dead, not so far from where I live. And he was not identified. He was an older man, and they still have never identified him. Wow. And it felt like, to me at the time, and I still feel this way, that to not even receive the dignity of being named when you die is a signifier of a much larger, macro societal problem. And I started to just talk about that. This was years ago with my family and friends and my children, about issues related to equity, to justice, to personal responsibility, to what it means to be somebody's neighbor, to structural issues related to violence, which can connect to a whole host of things, how someone becomes unhoused, to toxic masculinity, to divorce, to all these things that kind of in peripheral ways are part of this story. So that's sort of where it all got informed from. And then my co-writer on this, Ben Percy, I met a long time ago at a writers conference, and 15 years ago maybe, he wrote a short story called Refresh, which was about young men whose fathers are active reservists in the military that are deployed to Iraq. And so it was about a town without fathers and boys sort of violence rituals, basically creating fight clubs and videotaping themselves and sending those videos to their fathers. And I think we were interested in toxic masculinity with teenage boys. And so I adapted Ben's short story into a screenplay, which I went to the Sundance Screenwriters Lab with. And then in a very roundabout way, a really amazing artist I know named Danica Novgordoff adapted that screenplay into a graphic novel called also Refresh, which was selected for Best American Comics. And while we were developing that 15 years ago, we were talking a lot about structures related to violence and the subjectivity of a male or female experience, and what it means when a female artist interprets a story about male characters and vice versa. And all of those things were in the back of our minds. But I think, bringing it back to the beginning, being a parent, having to explain to my daughter why she can't always see herself on screen, why she doesn't always see characters that look and feel like her. When I know that when I was her age, there were tons for me because of privilege, a male privilege that we really need to interrogate and question. I think that was sort of the root of the story.
Just to go to the cast, finding, I don't know, I'm terrible with ages of children. What is the age range to the youngest to the oldest of this cast? Because they just seem like absolute naturals, like they've been doing it for years. How did you find these guys?
Yeah, I mean, they're around, I mean, like 11, 12 years old. And they, I've worked, I mean, one of my big creative partners on this was producer Jen Dana, and we just started talking a lot from the beginning about her childhood and her friendships, and then a casting director named Avi Kaufman, who's cast a lot of my films. She's a remarkable artist who's really great at sort of finding and advocating for young actors. She became part of the partnership, and she too became part of the conversation about her childhood, her friendships, what it's like for her as a mother. And it sort of all informed the process once we actually began casting, which was done during Zoom. So it was Avi and her team reading tons of kids, and then me meeting them over Zoom with them, and them reading with people, and us just talking, me really asking questions like, how weird is homeschool right now? How weird is, or like, do you have, when's the last time you were on a plane, or what music do you like, or anything, and just listening and trying to find people whose imaginations I found compelling and who I thought might grow up to be really amazing adults. It was sort of the same way I would approach a movie like Spectacular Now. And then it was sort of, as Avi and Jen and myself sort of found actors that we really responded to and found interesting, we thought served the characters and then transcended the characters. We began to sort of have them meet each other over Zoom and just try to create, but once they were cast, it was really just having them spend time together, like on Zoom and then ultimately in person, just trying to create their own shorthand, their own secrets, their own way of talking and thinking and relating to each other that was totally separate from the script or the movie, but that gave them full authority to own those characters and say things the way they would say them and make choices the way they would, in a way that's, again, through, rooted in the subjectivity of what it is to be that age, which is you see the world and you make decisions in a different way than you do as someone who's 30 years older, inherently, and you're not a teenager yet. If the characters were even just a few years older and they were teenagers, there would be much more of a cynicism or jadedness, or however you want to think of it, whatever we associate with adolescence would be there. But 11 and 12, you're like, kids develop on a spectrum. Some kids present as still kind of innocent, live in their imaginations. Some kids might be totally world weary, depending on their personal experience.
I found the movie really captured that feel of I remember being 12 and the summer holidays that always seemed to feel like they last forever, and it was sunny every day, even though, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't. And I'm sure, the summer doesn't last forever, but at that point it felt like, such a long space of time. And I really enjoyed that light of touch where it just, you dealt with, as you say, a lot of really kind of severe, finding a body and all these things, but it was wrapped up in a film which felt like it was from a child's point of view, and it was done in a way where you're watching it going, I still feel like I'm safe watching this film. It's like a warm hug.
Yeah.
And even though they're doing these kind of weird and horrendous things, and I thought it really captured that sense of wonder.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the films that you mentioned Stand By Me, but I think other films, older films about children in their first brushes with death or mortality, films like Forbidden Games or Young Torless or Spirit of the Beehive, or films like Ratcatcher, all films like that. I think you do have that. You have, sometimes there are absolutely horrendous things happening next to the kids, and either they're just processing it in a way that feels totally irrational to the way that we process things, or they're not aware of because it's just happening over there, or they're just seeing a totally different thing than the way that maybe their parents are. I think that, and where there might be a world of tonalities that sometimes feel incongruous with each other, because as an audience member, as an adult, you're like, this is grim, this should be very heavy. But I think kids are remarkable and resilient and use imaginations to process trauma in ways that some of us forget. And then I think a lot of my favorite artists who are adults, I think a lot of what they're doing is just tapping into the imagination of childhood, which just sees conflict and traumatic experiences through a different lens than most of us do, who have just learned to normalize terrible things.
Sure, 100%. And I mean, to mention, you did mention the Spectacular Now as well, which is a film obviously you directed. That has it has a really similar feel to it, but it's obviously that slightly older age range where, and again, I'm a really big fan of that film. I think it really captures that kind of awkward age of, you know, falling in love and all those things. Have you, I mean, is this something that obviously when you write something, are you ticking through the ages? I feel like you've got the next one coming, and you're kind of, I guess, you're experiencing these things and then writing them, and obviously having children's influence you. Is there something that you're bringing up next that might be a different kind of state of life and different time?
I think like a lot of the films that I really love reflect what the experience is that most of us have, which is we have an intergenerational life. You know, we have a cousin who we haven't seen in years, who just had kids, who maybe we should catch up with, you know, and because of COVID, maybe we've only met them over Zoom. We have a grandparent who's in a nursing home on the other side of the world. You know, like we have partners and kids in our own lives, but we have, you know, a neighbor who's elderly and about to die, and their adult kid who's taking care of them. We have all of the ways that I think our lives are generational. I think I find fascinating, and I think I've always, in the same way that I've always wondered about the delineation that existed in video stores in my childhood between drama and comedy, which never felt wholly right to me because life is a mix of both. I've also I like films that are conversations between generations. And I think there's certain groups that get excluded a lot, oftentimes, and marginalized in having their stories told, or stories told in a way that are not rooted in their subjectivity. And certainly very, very young people and very old people, the elderly, are both groups that get marginalized, and their points of view aren't often as valued as the interests of a 27-year-old that can be played by a 27-year-old movie star. You know what I mean? Like, so I think I like stories that crisscross, or that sometimes there's just a perspective maybe that's a little left of center in that way.
I find it really interesting, and I mean, if I may, obviously this is where you are now, and summering is something I'm looking forward to taking my girlfriend to go and see it as well, because I think she'll love it. I made her watch a film last night that she didn't enjoy at all, the new Predator film, and I feel like that
I've heard it's great. I haven't seen it.
I really enjoy.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it.
But summering is more her kind of film, so I feel like I'll be like, don't worry, I've chosen a film you'll actually like this time. I'm looking forward to her actually watching that. But yeah, so for you, like looking at your, like, obviously the things that you've done, and writing, producing, directing, what came first, and what was like the first love? How did it begin?
I think for me was, I mean, I've always been interested. I was a big reader, and I think I saw people, and I did cartoon. I loved cartoons. I mean, I was drawing a lot of cartoons when I was a kid, and I wanted to be a cartoonist. And my grandfather was an artist who did book covers for, he did a lot of Agatha Christie book covers, and people like Shirley Jackson and Isaac Asimov. Cool. And then he would also do sort of movie posters. A lot of times when American movies would go to Europe, he would do the European poster. So like he would do the French version of the Deliverance poster, or Papillon, or Escape from Alcatraz. Cool. But as a kid, seeing my grandfather just spend all day long, like with those Agatha Christie covers, he would have like my mom or my grandma or the neighbor pose like hanging from trees, or in bathtubs with their throat slashed, or just dressed up like detectives, or whatever it was that seemed, and he was the funniest person I knew. Just, there was this like darkness and lightness that was being expressed through the art that he did, that also fed my mom and my uncle, like that paid the bills. And so I think the idea of storytelling through that, I just found deeply intriguing. I was reading books, and then I was watching my grandfather paint book covers and posters, and I was devouring movies. So I started, I think, as a fan, someone who's loved stories and to my core, and found real meaning in them, and found and still find, like a movie like Prey, again, which I haven't seen, but like I would love to see that in a giant theater with a bunch of strangers. There is nothing more thrilling to me than going into the darkness and like being scared and laughing and crying with people I don't know, because so much of what it is to be alive in culture is being marketed to and being sold things that are supposed to make you feel better and repress your emotions. Films are an opportunity to express, to feel everything in the company of strangers, which is an amazing invitation. And so it's something that I really love.
I love that. And for an example, something that because obviously we've been shut out of cinemas for a long time, and we're only just getting to go back now, which is brilliant. But I went to see Top Gun, the new Top Gun, in the IMAX, and it was just like, I'd forgotten the experience of the audience reacting, as you say, and people getting into it and like laughing, screaming, clapping. And that is really something when you go back to it, you're like, I've missed this.
The exact same thing for me. It was, I felt like a child, in the best way. Like, I just was like, this screen is so big and this is so amazing. And on a personal level, there's Miles being great, but this looks beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I loved it the same way. I was really grateful.
And can I ask you, obviously, The Spectacular Now, that film, and working with Miles Teller, obviously he'd done quite a bit at that point, but like he's now like Miles Teller with a tash. He's like everyone knows who he is. He's in one of the biggest films of all time. Discovering someone like that and working with someone like that, what was the experience like? And is it kind of strange now to see him? I guess it's probably not, because he's very talented, but to see him doing what he's doing now must be amazing.
It's great. I mean, it's sort of, for me, like the way that sort of I cast films and put together an ensemble, it just, as I said, I really do love stories with people in different generations. And if they're older, like in that movie, if they're older characters, I'm able to cast people who I've seen in a lot of things. Like I cast Kyle Chandler and Jennifer Jason Leigh and Andre Royo and Bob Odenkirk, and I just knew them from other things. In the case of like Caitlin Dever or Brie Larson or Shailene or Miles, I didn't know them from as many things, and that's certainly the case with Summering. In every case, I mean, I'm doing a show right now, a TV show that I'm just finishing for Apple, from the Ted Lasso folks. It's a show called Shrinking, and the cast is Jessica Williams and Jason Segel and Harrison Ford. And obviously, people know who Harrison
I've
Ford
not heard of any of them, actually. Can you tell me?
Yeah, but
I'm very much looking forward to it.
There's other actors in it who you might not know yet, but you will, and they're amazing. And I expect that in time, some of the actors who are teenagers, like you will, like I believe in them, and I just love seeing them. So I think there's things that, I mean, the business, as they say, is so unpredictable. Like you don't know how people are going to respond to something you make. Certainly as an actor, you can't control the film. You can't control if it will make money. You can't control, it's a series of choices that you make and just trying to do your best work. So I can just say for myself, the actors that I'm lucky enough to work with, and I'm so lucky to work with all of them, I deeply believe in them. And I start as just a huge fan. And if some of them, become famous or already were famous, it's not surprising to me, only because, they're great. I mean, they're great. That's why, I'm just, maybe it's, I think when you're making something, if you if you believe in someone, you believe other people will. So I'm not surprised that Miles has become Miles Teller with a stash, as you said. He's always been that guy. He's always been great, as has Shailene and Brie and Caitlin and all the other young actors from that film, and as are the actors from Summering, who, I can't predict obviously what they will be doing in 10 years. But I know that right now, I think they're incredible.
That must be exciting, though, because you can look at these people that you've worked with and you get that feeling they have a little spark, and it must be exciting to be able to sit there and see where they go and watch the films they go off and do.
Cheerleader for them,
Yeah, of course. On the other side of that, when you write something like The Circle, and you've spent however long writing the script in a dark room, kind of hoping that someone's going to pick this film up, and the process, just for our audience, because I know there's a lot of writers that listen to this podcast, something like that from start to finish, what is that process like when you get an idea, and I don't know whether or not you were paid by a production company to write that, or whether or not it was something that you wrote and then went to people, but if you could talk about that, and then the whole process along until you get the amazing cast you got in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it started with like a really incredible, riveting, complicated novel that Dave Eggers wrote, who's a fantastic writer who's written so many great books. And it started by conversations that the two of us had, he knew I was a fan, and he had seen things I had done and been supportive, and I think I started talking to him about that while I was on the set of the end of the tour. I talked to him during a lunch break one day on the phone. And it just began as conversations. And then, would it be fun to do this, and how would we approach it? And we worked on it together. I mean, it was a book that he, was, had obviously, the book was amazing and had been in his life and consciousness for so long. And so it was a really amazing collaboration of just trying to turn it into a 2-hour film, trying to turn a complicated novel into, to really bring it down. I mean, a lot of novels become 10-hour limited series, to bring something down to 2 hours. It's a different approach to things. And so, it started from that collaboration, and then having a screenplay that we just shared with people, and that people were attracted to, people like Tom and Emma.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yeah, I mean, it must be pretty surreal to step on set and then be directing someone like Tom Hanks. I mean, that must be pretty wild. But
I mean, the great thing about actors like him, or like Emma, or like, I think all the actors that I've been lucky enough to work with, is when they're on set, they're just there to do the work. And when you turn the camera on, it doesn't matter whether someone is an 11-year-old acting in something for like the first time, or whether they've been in 50 movies. Their job is to just be natural and present in front of the camera. You know what I mean? And the camera doesn't care if you're famous, in that way.
Sure.
And so I think there's a quality of relatability and empathy and emotional availability that I believe is in most of the actors that we really connect with, that we love watching. There's an open-heartedness, and at least in my experience, that's not compartmentalized where that only exists when the camera's on. It's like part of how they carry themselves with the cast and crew when they're not filming, and when they're meeting fans or whatever it is. So it's actually really easy because they're really, people like that tend to be really nice. They want the work to be good. They're serious about the work, but they're also serious about being part of an environment where there's, a sense of equity and kindness and decency to everyone that they're working with.
Yeah, I guess the further up the ladder you go, the kind of, hopefully not the easier it gets, but you're working with professionals at the end of the day. So
that's what you hope.
That's what you hope. It's not the 1980s anymore. There aren't these kind of wild Hollywood stars that get away with all kinds of strange stuff. And for any sort of young writers, people wanting to be directors, have you got any, it's difficult, but do you have any sort of advice for someone that's kind of trying to crack their first screenplay and try, the hardest thing I've found, because I've been writing scripts, is to get the right people to read them. What advice would you give to a young writer, or in fact, would you give to your younger self when you were starting out?
Yeah, I mean, first it would just be to write as much as, these are obvious things, and there's nothing I'm going to say that's not probably a cliche, but to write as much as you can, and write every single day, and treat it as though you are doing a job where you have to clock in and clock out and do working hours. They treat it as a craft, not as an impulse. Everyone has an impulse to write, but to do it professionally, it's a craft that you have to be diligent about. And some days you're not going to be feeling it, but you really need to spend time with it, and know that especially early when you're starting out, your taste and the things that you like might not sync up with where your craft is yet, and the stories that you can tell. There's a disconnect. Like, you can say, I like that movie and I like that, but maybe your stories aren't there. And I think you have to work through that, and know that you have to write a lot of things. Everyone, even people that have been doing it for decades and decades, still there's always a struggle to get it right. But I think to work through things, and to create it, I would recommend having a community of people around you who you trust, family, friends, peers, whatever it is, who will be honest with you and who support you, and who you support as well, where you have a vested interest in seeing your friends rise, because you tend to rise together, even though it can feel human to feel insecure and measure yourself against other people, especially when they're having success. Recognize that there's something really good and nourishing to supporting the people around you, and to believe in the reciprocity of that, and to see people, make it and do it. And I think if someone's interested, I think write roles that actors want to play. That sounds like the most obvious thing, but write a part that you would really love to watch as a film goer. And I think if it's a really great role, there is a lot of people writing scripts, but there's always, when a great role, if it's a really great role, they tend to always find, actors who want to play them, because there's not enough great roles out there. And especially roles for actors where maybe they haven't gotten to play that type of role before, where they're able to flex a muscle that people haven't seen before. I think that's a great way, especially maybe for younger writer directors, to get an actor who seems really famous to do a film, because they have not, for whatever reason, they've been typecast and aren't getting to do something. So to think in those terms as well. I think it all has to come from an honest place and come from stories that you're passionate about and that you want to see, not that you think other people will want to see because it's in an opportunistic way. You have to genuinely be passionate about it. But so, if what you're really passionate about is Top Gun, great. If what you're really passionate about is John Cassavetes movies or Mike Leigh movies, that's great too. But it should come from a genuine place as a fan.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I think it's so important as well, as you say, like having that, like I don't think you can do it unless you're genuinely a film fan and you're just like passionate and you're throwing everything into it. It really is. Having a few writer directors on here, and they're always saying that it's a strange contrast, because writing it's quite a lonely thing that you do, and you have to, as you say, clock in, clock out, and you have to be diligent about it. And then directing is completely like you're on set and you're the guy that everyone goes to when they have a problem. And how do you find the contrast between writing something and then getting on set? Do you have a favorite between the two?
There's moments of both that I like. I think writing is rewriting. You know what I mean? It's easy to, not easy, but it's easier to write the first 15 pages of a script when you are excited about an idea. It's hard to get through the middle of the second act and really work on the structure of it. And it's even harder yet, maybe, to revise something for the 10th time, the 11th time, the 12th time. But that's part of the process. And it can be wildly dispiriting and can make you feel inadequate, 99% of the time. But the 1% of the time, when you feel like you've got something great, you feel superhuman for a moment, and then it's gone. There's moments of being on set that I really love as well. I love collaborating with great department heads, with great actors. And then there's, sometimes just the fatigue of being on set, and just having to answer a lot of questions. Depending on how much one is an extrovert versus an introvert might affect what they gravitate towards more. When you're a writer, you're having to answer your own questions constantly. If you're on set, you're having to answer other people's questions constantly. And it's a balance. So I like moments on both, and I also like being in the editing room too.
Of course, yeah. There's the whole element of that as well, going in and kind of hopefully not realizing that you haven't got it all. You've got to do reshoots, and it must be quite. You must sit there and sweat when you're doing a scene. You think, well, actually, there's something we've missed here, or, figured out the edit. That sounds like a nightmare. In terms of, we've talked a lot about, obviously, you working and doing all these amazing projects, but maybe earlier on when you were kind of, I say struggling writer, I don't know if you were struggling, but, in the periods where you were writing things and you were trying to get things made, did you have any sort of, what were your coping mechanisms for being, out of work, in between jobs, and how do you keep, I know I find it difficult in between work to sometimes stay sane. What kind of things did you do to kind of control that?
There were healthy things and unhealthy things. The healthy things I did was that I did other jobs to make money. I tutored kids for like the SATs, for like college admissions tests, for money. That was one thing, like making money, or being a waiter or a bar back, working in comedy clubs, or being a teaching assistant, or any of those things. Like, but making money to pay bills especially in some cases if it was things that I didn't see myself doing forever. You know, like cleaning tables, cleaning toilets, which I've done. It's not something that I, you know, wanted to do forever. So while I was doing them, I was aware that this was to put money in a bank account so that I could pay rent and eat, and have time to write. And oh my God, I'm tired, but I need to make time to write. So that was good. And I think, you know, I think I carry like a level of anxiety, as every writer does, of self-doubt, and have tendencies towards depression. And I think, you know, I think being in, it sounds silly maybe, but just doing things to keep myself in motion, whether it was work or just going for long runs or walking or just talking to other people, again, which sounds like very basic things, were really important to me when I was not feeling happy or good. And like drinking a lot, even ultimately was not very good temporarily. But yeah, I think staying busy was good, and also seeing things that just inspired me, reminding me why I wanted to write films or direct films. Like, just, I think at that same time I was spending a lot of time in theaters just watching old movies that I really loved, even if it was movies that I was seeing for the 6th or 7th time, that just, damn it, every time I saw them would make me cry. Like that's huge, to remind yourself, oh yeah, this is what I want to do, you know?
I think it's so important to talk about that sort of stuff as well, because, you know, a lot of people will look at yourself and other writers, directors that are, you know, obviously doing really well now, but it's hard to imagine the time where you know, you were struggling and you had all these jobs and you were worried about getting, you know, scripts made. And I think, you know, people trying to work their way up the ladder, you know, it's good to hear that, as hard as it is. And I really appreciate it, because it's, I mean, a lot of the reason I started this podcast is because in between acting roles, I was like, I want to talk to people that are passionate, excited about what they do, and they're successful and they're doing well. And so, you know, talking to you is like I mean, it's a boost for me, but it's also a boost for the audience, I think. And people, you know, working towards those goals and their dreams, and hoping to one day be in your position and making these movies. James, this has been great, and
Thank you.
I really, and as I said before, I'm a huge fan of The Spectacular now, and I'm a huge fan of Summering now that I've seen it.
Thank you.
I have one more question, and
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a tradition. I wondered if you had a moment. I always say most embarrassing moment, but a moment that you can share with us, something, you know, where you learned maybe a life lesson or a little anecdote about something that was a little bit embarrassing on set or when you were writing a project. Anything that springs to mind at all?
Oh man, there's so many. I mean, I think, to go back to your question you had before about what I did between gigs, I think before I was making films, I worked in a movie theater, and I got to watch a lot of free movies, which was great. It was one of the reasons I did it. And and there were other people there who were excited about movies, and so those conversations were great. And tearing tickets was okay, and selling popcorn was okay, but I also had to clean out the movie theaters and the bathrooms, and that was not so great. And
I've been there,
think,
man. I had the same job, so I know the pain you were going through.
and I think you learn about different audiences by the trash that they leave in a theater. And I just remember, you know, seeing, like, after a screening of like Con Air or Godzilla, you know, it was very different than like a lovely small art film like Kolia or something, like a Polish movie. Like, in one theater there would be yogurt covered raisins and bottled water. In the other one there would be diapers and used condoms and cigarettes and just all kinds of junk. And I was like, oh, they left it there because they thought that part of what they were paying for was the ability to let someone else that they didn't know just pick up their trash. And I was like, I never want to be that person that will just be okay with other people cleaning up literally my child's diapers, or to make such a mess in a public bathroom, because I would have to clean the floor and the walls of the bathroom, and people were so disgusting. And I think, I think doing those jobs reminded me that I love the art of films. I love the entertainment of films. And I think it brings about, I think, a deep gratitude in me that I get to do what I love. Specifically because I've done jobs where I didn't always get to do what I loved. And I tried to keep a sense of humor about it, but at times I did not think it was funny. I only do in retrospect.
Did they also make you do, when I worked at a cinema years ago, they always used to make you go up and announce the movie at the front of the thing. Did they ever get you to do that?
No, I would have loved to have done that. The theater that I worked at was not like a fancy movie theater where people announced it. They just started it. I would have liked that.
Well, I mean, there were diapers in the aisles. I'm presuming it probably wasn't. No.
No.
You did say, what was it? Yogurt coated raisins. That sounds pretty posh.
Yeah, that was the fancy movie. They would leave the bottled water. No, the other movie, like the Jerry Bruckheimer movie, the Michael Bay movie, that's where the diapers and the condoms were. And just the empty bottles of vodka or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for this, James, and all the best with summering. Really enjoyed it. And thanks so much for coming on here, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you to our guest, James, and thank you to 42 West. James's latest movie, Summering, starring Jake Bell, is out now. Support us on Patreon for early access to episodes, and follow us on TikTok. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. If you have time, write a review. It all makes a huge difference. Thank you.
It's a life in film, and you better come back next month to a life in film.